Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first and final module for this text. The body, I can't say it.
I feel that it is the body Karyavatara.
Yeah, great job, Miss Fitz. We're gonna just refer to it as the body.
The
right?
body.
Yeah, the body.
Okay.
The body is written by a kind fellow named Santideva, who is a very highly thought of Buddhist. That is a lovely illustration of him there on that slide. And it is another Buddhist text, really, and we'll get to this point in a second. You should be seeing these two texts, both the previous one about King Milinda and Nagasena, and this one about Santideva as on par, as going together, sorry. So Santideva was a Buddhist scholar writing in the 8th century. As we were saying before, really you've got to see it as him providing a text that goes along with Nagasena's text or beliefs that he put forward. And so in that way, we've just got to realise that Santideva is assuming, or just taken as the said thing, the right thing, Nagasena's belief in the not-self, which is anatta. So if we want to do a quick recap of belief in the not-self, what would you say, Miss Fitz?
Oh gosh. Okay, so it's very similar to Hume's bundle of perceptions theory.
Yeah.
Except instead of bundle of perceptions, it's a collocation of a series of successive dharmas.
Yeah.
So.
And I would also include the skandhas, if we shall.
Okay, yeah. So you are just a collection of all these things, form, feelings,
Yeah.
Consciousness, and they change from moment to moment.
Yeah.
So you're neither the same person you were a minute ago, nor a different person.
Yeah.
Because every part of you is caused by the ones that went before.
Great. So
that's called anatta?
yeah.
And then anicca is impermanence.
Yeah. So that's that constant flux.
Yeah.
But Santideva is just accepting that as the said thing, this belief in anatta, and then he's addressing some ethical implications of that belief. So the ethical implication in particular that he's interested in is to do with the suffering of others. So by implication it means, well, if we've got this theory where we believe that we do not have a fixed self, so not self, then what does that have to do with us caring for both our suffering and the suffering of others?
Good.
So very quickly, what I want you to do is, you could even meditate, maybe put your hands in those little circle thingies and cross your legs, I don't know, do something.
That actually means something. I think the fingers mean different things, and it's like when you place one finger on another.
They can't see your fingers.
Just imagine. It means the self joining the whole.
Okay.
Which is what Buddhism is about.
Very good. Okay, there you go. So you can do that, and I just want you to ponder this question. So is it possible for you to think of the feelings and suffering of others as equally important to your own? So maybe pause now and just have a think about that. And here kind of is the whole point or the crux of this text, okay? Is, well, if we think about this Buddhist idea of belief in not self or no fixed self, how does that make us think or about the suffering of others? Okay.
So if I am not really I, there's no I.
Yeah.
Does that affect how I think about the pain of others?
Yeah, definitely.
So, like, does it make it easier to care about others or less easy?
Well, potentially the first step is that it would make it easier to care about yourself, because there is no self.
It would make it easier to care?
To care less, sorry.
To care less about yourself.
To care less about yourself, because there is no self.
Interesting.
So it detaches you from maybe your own suffering, and then what we may find is that suffering just kind of becomes very similar or on par with the suffering of anyone.
That's a really good explanation, Tim.
So hopefully you have your text in front of you, and we're now looking at paragraphs or sections, passages.
Passages.
Passages is good. 90 to 96, all right? And this slide kind of is providing a summary of that, because they're a bit vague and weird, these passages, so hopefully we can unpack the main idea. And basically it's saying that if you take this acceptance and belief in not self and accept that the self is an illusion,
Yep.
does that mean I have to strive, so work really hard, to maximize happiness and minimize pain for all beings as much as for myself? Okay? And these here are a few kind of select quotes from those passages that kind of provide us key ideas to support this.
Yep.
All
So
right.
I guess like it talks a lot about equality in
Yes.
these passages.
Yep.
And I guess the connection is like if there's no self, as you said before, it makes it easier to think of others' suffering as equal to your own.
Yep.
Because it's like if there is a self, everything that relates to you seems like the most important thing in the universe.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
if there's no self, it's easier to think of everyone's pain and pleasure as equally important.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this last quote, these two last quotes really sum that up, okay? So I should dispel the suffering of others because it is suffering like my own suffering. So again, that equality idea. And I should, sorry, I have a typo there. I should help others too because of their nature as beings, which is like my own being. So being's the same, suffering the same.
Yeah. Everything is equal.
Yeah.
All suffering is equal.
And that top quote makes a point about that's somewhat important about affection, and basically it's saying because I have affection for myself, okay, so for even though that self is constantly changing, because I have affection for that self and I know what suffering is like to me,
Yes.
what it's like when I feel suffering, and because I now know that the suffering of everyone else is just like my suffering, then I should know how they're feeling
Yep.
when they're feeling suffering. So my affection for me
Yep.
leads me to understand their suffering. Okay?
Because it is the same.
And that
suffering.
then motivates this top key point. This really is probably one of the key conclusions you've got to take from this text, the heading here, that I've got to then maximize the happiness and minimize the pain
So
of
this
everyone.
is the ethical implication.
Yeah.
So whenever you see a word like must or should,
Yeah,
that's an ethical implication.
Yeah.
Yeah.
great.
So-
And the rest of the text kind of just tweaks that or builds it. There's a couple of objections and stuff like that. Okay,
Cool.
but this kind of really maintains...
Is the centre point.
Centre point. So, passage 97 raises a counter-argument to this key idea we've just looked at, and it goes, well, hang on, if I don't directly experience it, like the suffering of others, so if Mrs. Fitz is sitting there in pain, but I don't actually feel physically or emotionally feel the pain that she's feeling,
Yes.
why should I care about the feelings of others?
So this goes back to the idea that I was trying to describe before about when there's a self, your suffering feels like the most important thing in the world
Yeah.
because you're directly experiencing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So here's this question of why should I care as much for the suffering of others if it's not as directly impactful to
Yeah.
me?
Yeah.
Yep. So here's Santa Deva's response to the counter-argument, which is quite cool, really, because, again, it's drawing on the concept of not self, isn't it?
Yeah, that's key.
So it is saying there actually is no self. You are not the same person right now as you will be 5 years into the future.
Yeah.
So, but you kind of care about how you will feel in the future, don't
Yeah.
you?
Yeah.
If you knew you were going to have your hand chopped off in 5 years, you would be upset about that.
Yeah.
So go on.
So if I care about that future pain,
Yeah.
that doesn't affect me at all,
Because it's a totally different self.
yeah, then there's no reason why I shouldn't care for someone else's pain that doesn't affect me.
Because
It's
that's
exactly
also a
the same
totally
pain.
different self.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can't use the argument that I don't experience that pain, so I shouldn't care. Because I do care about pain I don't experience.
So I care about my future self's pain, therefore I should care about any other self's pain, even though
Because
self
it's
doesn't
not-
exist. We're using the word self as a conventional speech.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we now go over to passages 102 and 103, and it adds another kind of extra bit to this theory or this discussion. And here it's talking about this concept of altruism, which is about actively helping others being altruistic
Nice.
and assisting needing others. And what it's saying here is the earlier passages have suggested we should care and we should want to do stuff, but this part now is getting to the point where it's actually saying, getting much stronger, it's saying we need to actively ward off or try and stop the
So not only
suffering
care,
of
but
others.
act.
Yeah, we've got to act on that care. And kind of the main idea that the text uses to back this up is that no one disputes that suffering is bad, right? And that because no suffering belongs to anyone, if we're interested in stopping suffering, then we need to just try and stop all suffering.
In general.
Yeah, in general.
Okay.
Which means we should be actively watering off the suffering of others.
Okay.
Because that's just like us.
So here's an objection to the contention that we should actively do something about suffering / care about it.
Yep.
And the objection is that feeling compassion or, feeling sympathy for the suffering of others actually brings on more suffering.
Yep.
So if I feel sorry for you, I'm actually hurting as well.
Yep.
So why would we force more suffering to arise through compassion if we don't need to?
Yep.
What's the answer to that, Timothy?
Well, he says in passage 104, if one sees how much the world really suffers, all the suffering in the world, how can the suffering from just caring about that be considered great? So he's saying that's, okay, yes, caring or doing stuff about it might cause you little bit of suffering, but in comparison to the suffering of everyone else, the suffering of the world generally, it's insignificant.
Yes.
Okay? And then he even goes a bit further and says, if the suffering of one ends the suffering of many, then one who has compassion for others and himself must cause that suffering to arise.
They must cause that suffering to arise.
So you must cause that suffering in yourself if you can help.
You are obligated
others.
to cause that suffering in yourself. Now, what does this remind us of?
Yes, what?
It reminds us of the ethical theory of utilitarianism, which I hope some people from my class remember from last year.
What did you?
This is the theory that, what is it? It's the theory that the right thing to do in any situation is the thing which causes the most happiness to the greatest number of people.
Yep.
So if I have a choice between saving 5 people and saving 1 person, I should save the 5 people.
Yep.
Assuming that they're going to have equal amounts of happiness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's quite, I guess, it's both a good argument on centered at this point, but it's also just a quite interesting take on this, that potentially this guy is a Buddhist utilitarian.
So this is a picture of Santideva, and he is a Buddhist utilitarian.
Yeah,
because he is saying we are ethically obligated to cause ourselves to suffer for that little bit of suffering if it's going to alleviate the suffering of a lot of people.
And he gives an example of this suffering in passage 106, where he talks about Supsapakandra. Poor Supsapakandra is undergoing torture at the hands of a king. But he did the right thing and sat through that torture. Good Supsi. So to prevent the suffering of so many others. Okay? Supsi.
Good utilitarian response.
Supsi for president. Okay, so this is kind of like the ultimate point here as well. Alright? It's saying, so when we fully realise, and this is the meditation kind of image up the top of this, when we fully realise the meaning of anatta, so we realise that we do not have any self, then treating the suffering of others the same as our suffering, as your own suffering, will really come easily. And I guess the main reason for this is that self-sacrifice is pretty easy when there's no self. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Cool, I like that.
So you've reached this enlightened place. And he even goes so far to say, in passages 107 to 109, that when you reach that point, you'll get great joy from assisting the suffering of others. And he actually says something like, you could be going to like Avicii hell, which is like the depths of hell, the worst part of hell, and it would be like you're a goose or a geese.
A goose.
A goose, sorry, or a
Goose.
flock of geese, or a number of geese.
Yeah.
Swimming amongst the lotus flowers.
Okay, so the geese swimming amongst the lotus flowers is like a pleasant experience.
Yes.
And so he's saying, if you have achieved the realization of anatta,
Yep.
even
You'll help the suffering of others, which means you'll be getting this joy from potentially your own suffering even.
so even
and
if you're
so-
suffering in order to help others,
Yes. So,
like going
which-
to Avicii hell, even if it's that bad, it will feel like going through a pool of lotuses because
Yeah.
you'll get so much joy from helping others.
Yeah. What a cool place to get to. That
Lotuses.
is the place to be.
I'd love to be a goose.
You already are.